This video is brought to you by ExpressVPN. When it comes to media and entertainment, we continue to seek our gratification faster. In less than 20 years, we've gone from ICQ to Snapchat, from CDs to Spotify, from DVD box sets to Netflix, from the broadsheet to the Twitter feed, from YouTube to TikTok. Even within these new platforms, every effort is being made to condense things further. Quibi is a new premium streaming service that aims to deliver you the sort of high production value content you've come to expect from Netflix, only each show is limited to 10 minutes a pop. Most of the shows are terrible, but the fact that they've built this multi-billion-dollar platform around this time-based objective is instructive. Attention spans are getting shorter, so things are speeding up, and it's happening in video games too. Mobile games by their very nature have always aimed to deliver a shot of endorphins in the same time it takes to visit the throne room, but it happens in core games too. League of Legends is still among the most popular games in the world and has made numerous refinements over the years to get its match time down from 45 minutes when it started to an average of about 30 minutes these days. There's no shortage of long games being released today, by the way, from the 120-hour long Persona 5 to the classic MMOs which still promise to consume every moment you're willing to give up. But what interests me is the way that developers are trying to condense historically long gameplay loops into short, session-based styles of play. Returning to the MOBA analogy, Heroes of the Storm was essentially defined by its condensed game rhythm, where you could literally get 3 HOTS matches in for every 1 Dota 2 match. HOTS had many problems, but certainly one of the most celebrated features was just how digestible it was in a genre that often felt drawn out. Staying with Blizzard, World of Warcraft is about to release its Shadowlands expansion, where its signature new feature is the Tower of Torghast, a procedural dungeon experience that randomizes layouts, enemies, and upgrades, aiming to simulate and condense WoW's glacially slow progression curve into something that can be experienced inside of 30 to 60 minutes. The best example of these condensed gameplay loops is the Battle Royale genre. PUBG and its contemporaries all took the loot, equip, and upgrade rhythm we've become accustomed to in loot-based games and RPGs, and it combined that with the competitive shooter genre we've been playing since Doom LAN parties. Sure, you could grind for 40 hours in Borderlands to collect a sweet set of weapons and trinkets and shields that all coalesce to form some build, or you could just play a 40-minute round of Apex Legends or PUBG or Fortnite, which is going to fire off a lot of the same synapses in your brain. It's interesting now to look back at Tom Clancy's The Division, which in September 2016, a full 6 months before the arrival of PUBG, released its survival update, a battle royale game mode that condensed the entire arduous loot grind of The Division into a tight 30-minute experience. Whether it's WoW's Tower or The Division's survival or the booming battle royale genre, it's notable how much these games all rely on features core to the roguelike subgenre. Procedural generation, randomized loot placement and drops, and a massively truncated path to build diversity and varied playstyles. No 2 rounds of Apex Legends are the same, just as no 2 runs of Dead Cells are the same. There's obviously massive differences between these 2 games, not least of all the matter of multiplayer, but the core DNA of those 2 games is a lot more similar than you might think, owing to these roguelike underpinnings. So, why the hell have I spent this entire intro block talking about roguelike mechanics? Well, the truth is, I've been thinking about them a lot this year. Roguelikes have been around for a long time, but it really feels like they're gathering momentum lately. Spelunky was 2008, The Binding of Isaac was released in 2011, FTL was 2012, Enter the Gungeon was 2016, Prey Mooncrash and Dead Cells were 2018, Slay the Spire was 2019. This year alone, we've had Dreamscaper, Neon Abyss, Griftland, BPM, Risk of Rain 2, and Spelunky 2. It's a very big year for a subgenre that feels increasingly central to the way that many contemporary games, big and small, are being designed. We're especially lucky then that in a year so full of quality roguelikes, we also get Hades, a game that immediately takes its place within the pantheon of the genre's best. Regardless of opinion, Hades is objectively the most refined and polished roguelike yet released. Every inch of it sparkles with stunning hand-drawn visuals, transfixing voice performances, crisp, elegant writing, tight, satisfying combat, near endless build diversity, an impressive suite of enemies, and an absolutely banging soundtrack. What interests me most about Hades though isn't its polish, it's the way it inverts one of the core tenets of the roguelike subgenre, the rewards associated with the failure state. Most roguelikes forgo story altogether, relying instead on the simple thrill of gameplay to carry them forward. There may be some lore to broaden out the world, but narrative is not a focus. Some games hint at story throughout, delivering more exposition as the player manages to progress further. Hades is rather unique in that its moments of exposition come in between runs. Returning to the House of Hades after a death allows the player to speak to NPCs, receiving exposition in bite-sized chunks so tiny that there's story to be found after dozens of successful escapes from your father's clutches. I like this a lot. It very much reminded me of Disco Elysium, a game which also found a way to successfully invert the failure state. In most video game RPGs, a bad dice roll is typically just a missed opportunity. The door won't open for you, or the NPC won't let you make out with them. In Disco Elysium, a failed roll is simply a different outcome, typically hilarious but always worthwhile. You often welcome failure because you'll know there'll be something good waiting for you at the other side of it. It's the same here in Hades, where each death is almost welcomed because it's a chance to return home and learn more about the characters, the world, and your own place in all of it.
Stupid boy. I told you nobody gets out of here, whether alive or dead. So how was your wanton ransacking of my domain?
Greetings, Father. My ransacking was a delight, thank you for asking.
Other roguelikes seem to swell like a balloon as you play them, all the air rushing out of them with your death. Hades never feels deflated like that, because as soon as the thrill of gameplay ends, the thrill of exposition begins. That's not to say the exposition is reserved for failure alone. Clearing the game for the first time is really just the end of Act 1 in this particular Greek tragedy, and you'll need to complete the game an additional 9 times for the true ending to be unlocked. Secret side quests are also buried deep throughout your playthrough, each of them requiring some sort of success or progression to complete. Hades deftly balances the doling out of its exposition between both the success and failure states, such that whatever you're doing, whether it's dying or completing a full clear, you're getting something from it. As successful as this model is, it may not be to everyone's taste. For starters, I found the exposition in the House of Hades to be quite slow and often full of filler. Owing to the strength of the character designs, the incredible voice acting performances, and my own familiarity with Greek mythology, I very quickly became invested in these characters and these stories. I wanted to learn more about why Achilles was down there or what went down between Orpheus and Eurydice. Each trip back, I hurriedly sought them out only to find that they weren't there or that they had nothing interesting to say on the topic. Or if they did have something to say on it, it was just another circumspect, aloof utterance, the likes of which I'd heard dozens of times before when speaking to them. Much of my time spent talking to characters felt like I was being strung along, which felt out of place in a game that was otherwise so tight and focused and immediate. It's personal preference, of course. Many people will appreciate this slow pace, happy to simply enjoy more of Hades' superb gameplay while they're tossed morsels of story in between runs. Others, like myself, will likely feel as though the throttling is just a touch too aggressive. I very much value the design philosophy behind a roguelike handling exposition in this way, but I didn't love the calibration of it as much as others likely will. I imagine a roguelike experience where every single trip back to HQ feels like its own breathless page-turning chapter, where I feel like I just have to run out and die again straight away so I can get back and find out what happens next. Given how celebrated Hades is quickly becoming, I imagine we'll get a game like this someday, but it's not this game. Locking story progression behind successful clears of the game is also likely to receive mixed response from players. On the one hand, it introduces a compelling character chase, spurring you forward towards additional completion so you can find out what happens next. On the other hand, it introduces a new risk-reward equation that the roguelike genre has typically been free of. The risk of spending 30 minutes on a run only to see that effort wasted by dying at the hands of a final boss. It's of course not entirely wasted if you're there for the gameplay as much as the story, but I found it to be a point of frustration as I worked my way towards the ending credits. I desperately wanted to find out what happened to Hades and Zagreus and his mother, and I could only do so if I finished the game 10 times. On many of these attempts, I would fail, often on Hades himself, leaving me cursing my death in a way that I never did in games like Risk of Rain 2 or Dead Cells. This design also somewhat clashes with the packs of punishment, modifiers that become available after your first clear. After that point, each run begins with this screen, where you can add difficulty modifiers that profoundly alter the nature of your run. It's not just tuning health and damage numbers, it's additional enemies on mini-bosses gaining new abilities, or significant changes to the buffs you can bring or collect. It's an absolutely brilliantly designed system that allows you to precisely calibrate your run, while also ensuring an extremely long tail progression curve, since the rewards for completion exist for every weapon type and at numerous total heat levels. The problem is that you're less likely to want to engage this system if story is your goal, since they make the game harder when what you really want is to lock down 10 easy clears to hit the credits. You could turn on the optional God mode to make the game easier, but that feels a lot like cheating. You're more likely to simply avoid turning up the heat, choosing instead to grind out your additional completions with a greater chance of success. None of this is meant as criticism, by the way. Hades breaks new ground and does so with such tremendous confidence and capability that we're left to discuss how much we like those things, not whether or not those things are actually good. Of course Hades' narrative is good, it's just that some will find it a little slow. Of course locking the progression of the most compelling narrative behind successful clears is good, it's just that some people will find it a little more frustrating than they would otherwise prefer. More so than any other roguelike I've played, Hades feels highly throttled. It cannot be experienced at your own pace, even if you're a highly skilled player. It all happens at Supergiant's pace. Hades will be enjoyed by almost everyone that comes to it, but the degree to which you love it will likely be linked to whether or not you think the calibration of that throttling is right for you.
Goodbye, Father.
Separate from story, I very much felt the impacts of this throttling on the core gameplay as well. Hades begins with just one weapon unlocked, almost no talents available, and no structures built to aid you. Through run after run, you'll unlock things that have a significant impact on your power. It's of course possible to complete the game with no unlocks available at all, but this is only possible after you've finished the game multiple times on another save file and learned it inside out. Instead, you'll likely complete your first clear after about 20 to 30 attempts, since that's the point where your unlocks and your game knowledge will coalesce enough to give you a fighting chance. Those looking for a more free-form roguelike experience where everything is possible from the get-go and only player knowledge holds you back might feel that Hades is a little too prescriptive and restrictive, as though you're sort of set up to fail rather than giving you a fair chance at immediate success. Personally, I feel like it got the balance right because of how expertly it managed the relationship between player power and enemy power. Hades' enemies, bosses, and encounters all feel precisely tuned for an intended power level. You will make steady, incremental progress on this journey as you continue to bump into new obstacles that at first feel like brick walls, but eventually crumble before you. The finely balanced difficulty curve is only possible because Supergiant knew how to tune both the encounters and the rewards economy, upping its challenge in a way that never feels incommensurate with player power. There are many places where the polish and player testing of Hades can be felt, but none are as important or impactful as the sort of balancing that can only be achieved thanks to hundreds of thousands of hours of player testing during the early access period. Still, I can't help but reflect on my time with Risk of Rain 2, a game that opens up much faster than Hades does. There I felt like I was marching to the beat of my own drum, like I was always in control of my experience and how far I could get. There were unlocks that could only become available with time, but they felt like additional ways to deal damage or survive. They felt like options to broaden my arsenal and give me more choice. In Hades, your unlocks like the talents and the renovations all feel like the requisite keys needed to unlock the stage gates in your adventure. Risk of Rain 2 presents itself as a more classically inspired roguelike, where almost everything is immediately possible, where Hades feels more like a contemporary roguelite, where everything eventually becomes possible after you've put in the hours. I've already briefly mentioned the brilliance of Hades' combat, but I want to come back to it to make sure it gets its due in this video. It really is absolutely superb. The starting point is the weapon design, which across all the 6 available weapons never falters. Each swing or shot is snappy and satisfying, each moveset is a mix of fun and functionality. No two weapons can be played in remotely the same way because their uniqueness is all-consuming, from the way you engage, defend, move, or dig in. Each weapon demands that you understand it and master it deeply, the sort of mechanical mastery not often demanded in roguelikes, which typically rely on more basic weapon designs, augmented with interesting stat buffs and utility items. It's somewhat mind-blowing that each weapon has 4 base forms which can radically alter the way they perform, and can be further augmented by the datalist upgrades, changing them yet again. Where many other roguelikes ask, what can we add to make you more powerful? Hades asks, how can we augment what you already have to make it both more powerful and more interesting to play with? For the most part, Hades' enemy design is excellent, though it's not without its problems. Generally speaking, each enemy design has a specific set of attacks that are clearly telegraphed, deal the right damage, and can be easily countered when your game knowledge gets up to scratch. Some though, particularly the warriors in Elysium, can be frustrating. They typically have super armor so they can't be interrupted or staggered, they have huge long-range attacks that can often hit you from off-screen, some of them carry shields negating all frontal damage, and you have to kill each of them twice otherwise they respawn. These chariots also have too much goddamn health. Obviously, the intention was to kick up the difficulty in what is the penultimate zone, but these enemies feel oppressive in a way that other enemies don't, not even the bosses. The biggest problem with Hades for me, and the reason I don't love it quite as much as everybody else, is the amount of visual noise going on, and how Supergiant not only don't do anything to alleviate this issue, but actively lean into it in the later levels. Visual noise is essentially on-screen clutter, where too many things are on screen at once and it becomes difficult to discern one thing from the other. In Hades, everything produces these lush particle effects that fly across the screen or simply sit there when they spawn. It's possible to have your dash throw out a blue puff of chilling frost, your dash starting point be a pulsating purple cloud of hangover, your cast throw out some slowly spinning blade, your special bounce chain lightning between your foes, and your base attacks generating large splashes whenever they hit their enemies. All of this is on top of the ground traps, the poison and the magma, and the bombs and the arrows and the spears that enemies are constantly throwing at you, never mind the actual enemies themselves. Having a lot of stuff on screen at once is not unique to Hades, since most games like this will get pretty messy, but Hades just feels even more noisy, and I regularly found it difficult to pass the chaos. To be clear, this is not a problem I have in other games. Bullet hells are actually a genre that I typically found pretty easy for some reason. Even recently, I played 60 hours of Risk of Rain 2, a game that can get completely buck wild with on-screen madness, and I never once, not once, found myself thinking, well, I just can't make sense of this. I thought this all the time with Hades, as I found myself struggling to see everything that was going on so I could react to it. There would have been some things Supergiant could have done to alleviate this. Final Fantasy XIV has a toggle for spell effects that lets you disable a whole bunch of them or turn them down. This would have been a godsend in Hades, no pun intended. Even more basic things would have gone a long way. My biggest gripe within this category of gripes is that hitting enemies makes them flash white to denote that you've dealt damage, but enemies also flash white when they're about to attack you. So in fights like this one, you can't rely on the white flash indicator because you're constantly making the boss flash white by attacking them. The Temple of Styx seems to double down on all of this. Where other areas are generally spacious, the temple is not so much a temple as it is a rabbit warren-like dungeon. Tight, claustrophobic even, with so little room to maneuver to begin with, and even less so after the rats are done pouring poison all over the place, or the clay pots done hurling their bombs at you, and tiny rats which are so small and camouflaged into the background that you're often just madly dashing around and spamming your AoE abilities to avoid them. For a game that already struggles with visual clarity, many of the design choices underpinning this final section are a little baffling. Even with all of these shortcomings, I'm a little in awe of Hades because of how sophisticated almost every part of it is. Hades feels deeper than any roguelike I've played before, even though it has less stuff. It has fewer enemies, fewer weapons, fewer areas, fewer bosses, but within each of those things is this mechanical depth that is so hard to produce and so rare to find in games. I mean, coming back to Risk of Rain 2, a game that I personally prefer to Hades. I think the biggest shortcoming of that game was that it was very reliant on stats and passive damage to alter your playthrough. I could get a lot of items that can all proc off each other and do huge AoE damage or apply bleeds or let me use my items more often, but the mechanical process of controlling my character and using its abilities remains largely unchanged from run to run. Hades feels quite remarkable in the way that each weapon and each weapon form and each Daedalus upgrade and each boon, they all provide the statistical upgrades you'd expect, but they also ask me to play differently, dashing towards projectiles in one playthrough to deflect them, dashing on top of enemies in the next playthrough to zap them with lightning. A lot of my playthroughs in various roguelikes have felt similar to one another, even when the items I've picked up were vastly different. In Hades, no two runs ever feel the same. I mean, I could make them feel the same if I wanted to, but I'm so incentivized to try new weapons, try new boons, try new combinations of boons that it just feels like a waste not to. Coming back to what I discussed at the start of this video about roguelike design becoming more pervasive, Hades has really got me thinking about ARPG design and looter design in general. Like, I think about what it will mean to play Diablo 4 when it releases, and I'm imagining a process of leveling a character and grinding out their weapons and gear sets for dozens of hours to eventually arrive at something I'm happy with. In all that time, I've been doing essentially the same thing over and over, 50 hours of farming on my barbarian to arrive at a build, only to move on to another class and do all that all over again. I don't know about that now. I mean, we've already seen these ARPGs move to a seasonal model, which aims to bookend your character progression with start and finish. It's like a really, really long roguelike session that goes for 3 months instead of 30 minutes. Implied in that seasonal model is the awareness that it's the progression that's most engaging, the process of building your character, rather than the destination of a final build. The goal is not to have a build, but to be building one. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking all of these things, but I'm almost certain that this year of quality roguelikes have begun a process of rewiring my brain. In particular, Hades' isometric dungeon crawling is so satisfying and so refined that it's got me thinking like it's gonna be hard to go back to those more time sink style games. If I can experience the highs and lows that genre has to offer in so refined and condensed a form here in Hades, what incentive is there for me to have it any other way? I don't know the answer to that yet, but Hades certainly has me thinking about it. Dude, it's 2020. Are you telling me you're not using a VPN to encrypt and protect your data? Is that what you're telling me? You're just out there surfing those intertubes with all your personal information and passwords exposed? Just imagine if someone got hold of your browser history. Don't worry though, I got you covered, and more specifically, ExpressVPN have you covered. ExpressVPN are rated the #1 VPN solution by multiple publications because their service is safe, reliable, and fast. ExpressVPN encrypts your personal data so that it's harder for malicious hackers to get hold of your information, like your login passwords or your credit card details. You know those emails you keep getting about someone trying to reset your password? ExpressVPN is just one of the ways you can stop those hacks from happening. But it's not just about security, it's also about good times. Personally, I use it for Netflix, where I can't get access to the latest episodes of Rick and Morty here in Australia. ExpressVPN lets me sidestep that so I can watch whatever the hell I damn please. It's also about gaming, where you can get early access to games that launch earlier around the world. So if Cyberpunk unlocks in New Zealand, but you have to wait another 17 hours in your country, you don't have to wait anymore. You just change your location with ExpressVPN and away you go. Find out how you can get 3 months free by clicking the link in the description box below or visit expressvpn.com/skillup. Thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching it. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down so I know to do better for next time. If you enjoyed yourself, consider subscribing, and if you really enjoyed yourself, maybe consider hitting that notification bell so you never miss a video. You can see my patrons here on the left. They're awesome. They're amazing. If you want to join them, check out my Patreon page. Thank you again. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.